Hello Year 11, I'm Mr. Marsh and today I'm going to be taking you through Act 5, Scene 3. Now before I get into the specifics of this scene, I thought we'd just talk a little bit about something that's been in the news recently. You may have seen lots about the US election and the fact that Donald Trump has received a fair bit of criticism in the way that he has actually handled this election. Now, the results come in that he has lost the election, but Donald Trump is fighting against this. He's arguing claims of fraud, cheating, and he's looking to take this to court and fight against the result. He's not accepting defeat. Now, across the world, many of the world's media have criticised him for the way he's behaved and suggested that he's shown a bit of a lack of dignity or grace in defeat. Now, if we just have a little think about Macbeth here, during Act 5, we can see the writings on the wall and that he is heading towards his own defeat. That's been obvious for a while. His lords and noblemen are deserting him, the army's approaching him. And by the time it gets to the end, if you think back to when you watched the movie version, the Polanski movie version, we see he's entirely deserted and defeat is inevitable. He cannot win. But he refuses to accept that. Now, if we consider Donald Trump being criticised here in 2020 for refusing to accept defeat, it's interesting to maybe think that perhaps Macbeth's refusal to admit defeat would not have been viewed in the same way by a Jacobean audience. Maybe they might have seen this differently. Just have a pause of the video and make a note to yourself, have a little think. Why might a Jacobean audience have considered Macbeth's behaviour and his refusal to accept defeat despite what the rest of the people wanted? Why might they see that as something different and not perhaps criticise it in the way people are criticising Donald Trump here in 2020? Just pause now. Okay, so chances are you've maybe thought about how they perhaps viewed masculinity, how they might have thought about it being manly to battle on and to continue to fight in defeat. Now we would look to Donald Trump and we would look to the leaders of today and want them to behave perhaps gracefully and accept. Here with Macbeth, that perhaps is a certain sense of admiration for him, that he holds on to this and refuses to give up. An interesting thought as we head into the final stages of Act 5. Okay, now before we go into the details of it then, I'd like you to get up to speed and remind yourself of exactly what happens in Act 5, Scene 3. So there's a link here. If you have a look, the YouTube link, you can just click on that, have a watch the summary of the scene, make some notes as you go through, always worthwhile doing that as well. If you need the script, you can access the link here as well. The Spark Notes will take you through that. So pause this video, go and watch the summary, and then come back to it when you're done. Okay, welcome back. The next thing I'd like to do now you've got hopefully a good understanding of what actually takes place in Act 5, Scene 3. I want you to think about that question in the green box at the top. How do you think Shakespeare wants us to view Macbeth at this moment? So here in Act 5, Scene 3, how does he want us to feel about Macbeth? What are we supposed to think about him and his character? How is he behaving and what assumptions can we make? Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, just to pause this video, note down your ideas in your book, really think about how Shakespeare might want us to perceive Macbeth. Now for each point that you actually make, I'd like you to think of a quotation or add a quotation that actually supports your view. Okay, so if you don't have a copy of the text, remember you can click the Spark Notes which has the full script in there. So for each point that you make, try and have a quotation to back it up. Okay, pause the video, have a go at that task please. Okay, welcome back. So, hopefully you've got a series of suggestions there of things that you might consider. Now I'm just going to go through a few. If you don't have any of these, you can add these to your own notes as well. Okay, so perhaps one of the first things he might want us to view Macbeth as is bold and arrogant. All right, this is something you might notice again in the way he's speaking to people. Look at his use of imperatives. Now if you can cast your mind back to Act 4, Scene 1, when we see him demanding and commanding the witches and the apparitions with these firm imperatives that he uses. And he does this again right from the start here when told about the approaching army. look at the way he speaks. Bring me no reports. Fly false thanes. And then speaking to the doctor, throw physic to the dogs. So here what we see is a man completely self-assured. He's actually called a confident tyrant in the next scene by Seward. But you see this is someone who is full of his own self-belief. He's bold, he's arrogant in the way he's speaking to others. He also comes across as somebody in denial. So he seems to treat the news, for example, regarding Lady Macbeth, and when the doctor explains that she seems to be almost beyond his help, and the impending battle with this same disregard. It's as though he prefers to ignore the truth and sort of hold on to the prophecies that the witches gave him. So here, he's clearly denying what seems to be the truth, a refusal to accept. The other thing we could say is that he seems very aggressive. Right? Notice some of the sort of angry words he uses. And maybe again this is another attempt, like we mentioned before, to sort of hold or portray some masculinity, to assert his manhood. Remember, think what Lady Macbeth had said to him in the earlier scenes, questioning whether he was a man. Here he's trying to maybe use this as sort of a contrast to perhaps the cowardice that he thinks the others have. Look at the way he speaks to them. He talks to his servant. He calls him cream-faced, lily-livered. So the idea of white, if you think about the associations of the colour white being surrender. Coward. Think about Lady Macbeth earlier, who says to him she was shamed to wear a heart so white when he potentially is backing out of the murder of King Duncan. So you can see he's insulting others. It's all about putting on the show of bravery and aggression. And he even insults the rebel soldiers as the English epicures, suggesting that they're too soft. They like the fine things in life. They're not prepared to stand up for the battle. Okay, so bold and arrogant, in denial, and aggressive. Okay, so all quite negative things we can say about him here. So perhaps Shakespeare's wanting us to dislike him. Shakespeare's wanting us to maybe be glad about the fact his demise is approaching, and that soon the end will come. But let's just think of something else for a moment. Let's have a look at it from another way. Aristotle once said that a tragedy should invoke pity and fear. Okay, a tragedy should invoke pity and fear in the audience. And let's just consider for a minute if this is how we actually feel about Macbeth. Now, if we take the fear aspect, Macbeth himself says, "I cannot taint with fear." He says that the linen cheeks of the others are counsellors to fear, suggests that they're frightened. And he even says, "Hang those that talk of fear, I will not be afraid of death." This is as the army are approaching. So he's showing fear to be something shameful. It's something that he refuses to deal with. We could even say an audience might fear for him, that we fear for his own death. So there are certainly elements of fear within this. But let's consider for a minute then, if we've got the fear, have we got the pity? All right, and it seems as though we don't have, because of the way he's behaving, the way he's carrying on. But there is a section, there is a part of this scene that might make us question that. And it's this bit here you see in the blue box. He says, "This push will cheer me ever or deceit me now." This battle will kind of decide what happens to me. But look how reflective he becomes. "I've lived long enough. My way of life is fallen into the sear, the yellow leaf that falls from the tree. And that which should accompany old age, honour, love, obedience, and friends, I must not look to have. Instead, he has curses." So what he's doing here, I think there's an element we could say that Shakespeare actually wants us to pity Macbeth in some senses. It seems odd, but we do see this glimpse of another side to him in this scene, amidst all the anger and aggression. So he admits to being sick at heart. He says he's entered the season of the yellow leaf. So literally his reputation is falling, his life, he's moving towards that sense of old age when he should have all these great things around him. But there's a moment of self-realisation. This metaphor suggests his life is like a dying plant. It's a bit of a throwback. So we think back to the noble Macbeth, the loyal, brave, honourable Macbeth that we heard in those early scenes. He was once that person. And this just gives us a little reminder that he was not always this evil tyrant. And so perhaps there's an attempt evoking pity at this tragic demise. Remember, it's the tragic hero. He's a fallen hero. So I think Shakespeare at this point just tries to give us a little reminder. Don't forget, he wasn't always this way. Don't forget he's been corrupted and turned, perhaps by his own ambition, perhaps by others around him. Okay? So, equally though, so there is that glimpse of pity, but let's not forget, the bulk of it is dominated by this brash, brazen Macbeth that seems to be, as we say, aggressive and in denial. Now, another thing we could draw upon here to suggest this idea that this Macbeth is all about the aggression and the violence and the fight, excuse me, is the clothing. So remember that theme again, mentioned it in the last scene, something we've touched upon before. Throughout this scene, he makes constant requests for his armour. Okay, so have a think about what this might suggest for his mindset. These are just some examples. He says, "Come, put mine armour on." He is told, his servant tells him, there's no need yet, that there's some time before he needs to actually get fully clad in this heavy armour. The fight isn't going to be happening for a while. But he keeps demanding, "Give me mine armour." And then he later says, "I'll fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked. Give me my armour." So there's this constant insistence about wearing his fighting clothes. He wants to put that on almost as a kind of a suggestion as to his own mindset, what he is about, that he is not going to give up, that he's going to continue to fight. And that's what he's showing, that's what he's projecting to the lords and the others that are around him still, that he is willing to fight and not give in. Okay. So there's lots of ideas there that we can talk about how Shakespeare perhaps wants us to view Macbeth, but let's have a little think about the way Shakespeare actually structures the scene as well. So perhaps a new heading in your notes for structural ideas. So we've got to think about why Shakespeare's organised the scene in the way that he has. And with structure, just keep in mind what we're thinking about is things like the order of events. Why do certain things happen in a certain order within a scene? What happens at the beginning? How does it finish? What does Shakespeare choose to include or even omit and leave out from the scene? These are all things you can consider while you're thinking about the importance of Act 5, Scene 3. So, what I'm going to ask you to do just quickly in your books or on your paper if you're working at home, draw out this table here that I'm going to show you next, and just make notes first of all on anything that might be significant in those categories. So, the order of events, can you think of anything about the way this scene is ordered that might be worthy of a point, worthy of a comment? What's it revealing or showing to us? How does it begin and end? Why do you think that's significant? And can you think about what is chosen to be included here and what is perhaps left out? Can you have a little think, a bit of a tricky one, but can you have a little think about how that might affect us, how that affects our understanding of this play and how it affects our understanding of Macbeth? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pause it there, come back to me when you've made a few notes in that table. Okay. Welcome back. So let's have a quick look through these then. So let's first of all think about how it begins. So the scene begins with Macbeth arrogantly kind of pronouncing, "Bring me no more reports, let them fly all, till Burnham would move to Dunsinane, I cannot take with fear." So he's really kind of bold and dramatic. Now, of course, what do we remember from Act 5, Scene 2? It was the discussion of Burnham Wood, the Lords. Remember, that's where they were meeting the other army. So we've got this kind of this premonition. We know the foreshadowing of what is to come. We know that this is going to be part of his demise because we remember what the witches said. But it's interesting that we see right at the very beginning, Shakespeare reminds us, look how delusional Macbeth is. Look how much he holds on to the witches' prophecies. So, with the meeting at Burnham Wood, the audience has just been reminded, but Macbeth fails to see the threat, okay, as we become increasingly aware. So ultimately, again, because of his hubris, because of his sort of self-importance, his arrogance, he can't see it, but the audience can see that the final tragic downfall is approaching. Okay, immediately following this, so think about the order of events here. Immediately following this comment about Burnham Wood, Macbeth outlines another of the predictions. So this further shows his arrogance, right? He says, "What's the boy Malcolm?" And then he goes on and starts talking about, well, the spirits that know all mortal consequence have told him no man of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Okay, so he's still holding on to these prophecies. He doesn't see what is wrong with them. He doesn't see that this can be any harm to him. And he repeats that bold